Let's assume your project has gotten really popular and you want to have multiple podcasts and you want to make sure that all of them can use the same version of the application that you developed here to process things. So, in order to do that, we're going to need to create another repo that's going to hold our generator. And then we can create other repos that just have our different podcasts calling the same action from this new generator that we'll be creating. So, first off, I'm going to create a new repo. I'll go to github.new and I'm going to call this podcast generator. All right, that's available. And I'll go ahead and add a README file. And then I'm also going to add an MIT license because eventually I'm going to put this in the marketplace and I want everyone to be able to use my awesome podcast generator. All right, so I'll create a repository. And you can see that it just gives you a very basic podcast generator file with this license. We're going to need to move some things from our other repository, mainly the Python file. And so we can, if we want to, download this, but this Python file is so small that I'm just going to click on feed.py and I'll click on this button right here that lets me copy the contents of this. And then I'll just recreate it in my new repository. So I'm going to come in here, add a file, create new file. I'll call it feed.py. And then I'll just paste the file contents from my other document. I'll hit commit changes. And I'll commit this. And now I have my feed.py application in here. Now, in order to do this, I'm going to need a series of other documents that will allow me to run this generator as its own action that other repos can use. So I'm going to need a Dockerfile as well as an action file that's going to run the application. And I'm also going to need something called an entry point. The entry point is what's going to run when other repos call on this action. So in this video, I'm going to get started with the Dockerfile. You're going to see that it's similar to other things that we have made. So I'll go back into Podcast Generator here again. You can do a lot of stuff from just GitHub itself. You can, if you want to, type all this in here just by adding the file like I did this Python document. But whenever things get more complicated, you may want to go ahead and create code space if you have that available. So I'm going to say create code space on main to create a code space out of this document. So we'll take a second to pull all this up. And here are all my files. And now I have a much better editor that's like Visual Studio Code that I can use. So I don't need to wait until this is done. I'll go ahead and click on this plus button right here to create a new file. And I'm just going to call it Dockerfile. This is a weird file because it doesn't have an extension. It's just called Dockerfile. And we're going to issue a series of commands. So Dockerfile basically controls how your cloud server creates a virtual machine. So it's sort of the steps for creating a virtual machine. Now, we saw some of this when we created our own actions where we could specify the types of machine that you generate. So my first command is going to be Ubuntu latest, and that's going to procure an Ubuntu machine for me. And then I'm going to install things. Now, this is going to be more of a raw installation than what I did earlier. So it's almost as if you were running things from a command line. So I'm going to issue another run command, and this is just another Docker command. We've got plenty of courses that can show you how to work with Docker as well if you need more help with this. I'm going to once again turn off Copilot. You need to do that, I guess, for every type of file that you're working with. And since it doesn't know Docker files, I needed to turn that off or it's going to give me a little bit too much code that will be distracted. All right, so here I'm assuming that it's procured a machine, an Ubuntu machine that's a Linux machine, the latest version of that. And now I need to go ahead and run some commands that will allow me to install things. So I'm going to say apt.get update and apt-get install -y and then a / like this. So basically, we're going to update apt-get, which is how I load things into Ubuntu. And then I'm going to install additional packages that I want to work with. Now, luckily for us, we're getting comfortable with YAML, and Docker files are also written in YAML. So now what we want to install here is Python version 3.10, like we've been doing. And these slashes is almost like carriage returns. I could run these different commands with different run statements, but this slash means that I can run them in multiple lines like this. A little bit easier. So I'm going to say Python 3-pip. And then finally, I want to make sure that I also have Git on this machine. So before we were using an action that took care of these things for us, but now we have to do it a little bit manually because we're basically creating a machine from scratch. Then we'll do another run statement here, and we'll do pip3 install py-yaml. So this is the module that we've been using, and it's called py-yaml like this. So we'll go ahead and run that to make sure that we not only have Git and Python, but also this py-yaml so that we can use it with this feed.py document. All right, so I need to also copy a couple of files. So this is all happening in the cloud, and I need to copy some files from my repository basically to the computer or the Docker image that I'm creating. So I'm going to copy feed.py, right? And I'll put it in user bin feed.py. So I'm going to put it in this folder. Well, in this user folder, the bin folder, which is a pretty common location in Linux. And then I'm going to also copy a file that I'll be creating called entrypoint.sh, and I'm going to put it in the root level and name it entrypoint.sh as well. So copying it again from my repository to my Docker image, which is basically like copying it to the machine that I'll be using it in. All right, so finally I need to specify the entry point for this project. So I'll say entry point. So this is the file that is going to run when this machine is finished procuring. And I want to run /entrypoint.sh. All right. So now I'm going to save this file. And that is the basics of the type of Docker file that I would need to run things. So that's enough for right now. I'll pick up the rest of the other files in the next couple of videos.